At a time when the most reliable witness to police brutality in the U.S. is a camera, in Canada tonight, it's the RCMP's own video that's providing the most brutal view of a violent arrest. Dashcam footage shows that 4 seconds after Athabaskan Chipewyan First Nation chief Allan Adam gets out of his car, a second officer runs in, tackles him to the ground. Moments later, that officer punches Allan when he is already on the ground. CTV's Ottawa Bureau Chief Joyce Napier on the disturbing images just one day after the RCMP commissioner denied systemic racism in her ranks.
This newly released video shows how RCMP officers arrested First Nations Chief Allan Adam in Fort McMurray. Shoved to the ground, punched in the face, all for an expired license plate. This is Chief Adam after he was released, but not before being charged.
He didn't assault anyone. He didn't resist arrest. There was no lawful basis for the charge of resisting arrest. There's no other explanation other than his race.
The video made public the day after the RCMP commissioner struggled to answer the question of systemic racism in her ranks. Today, however, the Prime Minister took it on.
Systemic racism is an issue right across the country, in all our institutions, including in all our police forces, including in the RCMP.
But in a series of media interviews, Commissioner Brenda Lucki stayed on message and did not recognize systemic racism in the RCMP.
I've heard about 5 or 6 definitions, and so when I think of systemic racism being embedded into policy and procedure, when I think of it in those terms, I think it's not completely systemic. I've honestly heard about 15 or 20 definitions of systemic racism. When I think of unconscious bias, there is unconscious bias in the RCMP, most definitely.
For this retired officer who was in the RCMP for 17 years in Northern Alberta, systemic racism in the force is a fact.
Experiencing racism and being unable to approach superiors or supervisors to address the issue, that's a systemic problem. Comments that are made to me directly or made to other Indigenous members directly, that could be said to be individualized racism, but the fact that it's so rampant and accepted says that it is truly systemic.
No justice, no peace.
In the wake of the protests over George Floyd's death, Commissioner Lucki weighed her words yesterday. This while the RCMP is under investigation for Chief Adam's arrest and an officer's violent arrest of a man in Nunavut.
It isn't by some magical stroke of fate that the RCMP would be immune to that.
The Minister for Indigenous Services pointed to a promise that Lucki made 2 years ago to the Commission for Missing and Murdered Indigenous Women and Girls.
It is very clear to me that the RCMP could have done better, and I promise to you we will do better.
That was a promise 2 years ago. I look at the events of the last couple weeks, and I ask myself, is that the best? Is that the absolute best?
Justin Trudeau still fully supports his RCMP commissioner. The Prime Minister promised change, but no details, Lisa, as the country goes through what he calls an awakening.
All right, Joyce Napier in Ottawa tonight. And again, RCMP top brass all have access to the same dashcam video and still conclude there is no systemic racism in the force.